Jordan Ellis was 19 years old, and he had $17.43 to his name when he gave 12 of them to the man outside the arena. 2 jobs, 51 hours a week, and every dollar split between the community college tuition he was paying, semester by semester, and the bus pass that got him to both jobs, and the groceries that kept him functional enough to do both jobs, and the $5 a week he put aside for the fund. He had started calling in his head the Get Out of This Situation Fund, which was growing very slowly. The parking lot attendant supervisor's name was Carl Higgins, and Carl had been managing that lot outside the Staples Center for 8 years and had a rule about attendants interacting with the public outside their defined duties, which he had stated clearly at orientation, and which Jordan had been told once in writing, and which Jordan had apparently not considered carefully enough when he reached into his jacket pocket on a Tuesday night in February and pulled out everything he had and held it out to a stranger sitting against the wall in the rain. What Carl Higgins did not know was that the stranger was watching the whole thing from across the parking lot. What Jordan did not know was that the stranger was Kobe Bryant. And what neither of them knew was that the $12 Jordan Ellis handed over in the rain was going to be the most consequential decision of his 19-year-old life. Jordan had been working the east gate of the Staples Center lot for 3 weeks. He liked the work. He liked the system of it, the way the cars came, and the way you directed them, and the way the lot filled up in a pattern you could learn to anticipate. And he liked the hour before the gates opened when the lot was empty, and he could walk the lanes checking the cones, and it was quiet, and he could think. On Tuesdays, he worked the late shift, which meant he was there until 11, cleaning up after the game crowd, which was mostly standing at the east gate, watching the last cars leave, and then sweeping the lane, and then clocking out and catching the 11:45 bus. It was 9:17 on a Tuesday in February, and the game had just ended, and the crowd was filtering out, and Jordan was standing at the east gate, watching the cars, when he saw the man. He was sitting against the exterior wall, maybe 30 feet from the gate in the rain that had started an hour ago, wearing a jacket that was not built for rain, and he was not asking anyone for anything. He was just sitting there watching the crowd pass. The way people sit when they have nowhere to go and have stopped expecting anyone to notice. Jordan watched him for 4 minutes. He thought about Carl's rule. He thought about $17.43. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out his wallet and looked at what was in it, which was a 5 and a 10 and 2 singles and 43 cents. And he took out the 5 and the 10 and walked over to the man and crouched down to his level and held the money out. And the man looked at the money and then at Jordan. And Jordan said, "You look like you need it more than I do tonight." And the man looked at him for a moment and then took the money. And Jordan stood up and walked back to the east gate. He did not see Carl Higgins standing by the attendant booth, watching. Carl waited until Jordan was back at the gate, and then he walked over and said, "I saw that." And Jordan said, "Okay." And Carl said, "That's not what this job is." And Jordan said, "I understand that." And Carl said, "I told you at orientation." And Jordan said, "You did." And Carl said, "I need your badge." And Jordan unclipped his badge and handed it over. And Carl said, "You can collect your last check on Friday." And Jordan said, "Okay." And Carl walked away. Jordan stood at the east gate for the remaining 40 minutes of his shift because nobody had told him to leave immediately, and because he was not the kind of person who left before the work was done. He caught the 11:45 bus. He counted what was left in his wallet on the bus, which was $5.43, and he thought about the tuition payment that was due in 3 weeks, and he took out his phone and looked at his bank balance, which was $412, and he put his phone away and looked out the bus window at the Los Angeles night going past. He did not regret the $12. What Jordan did not know was that the man he had given it to had stood up from the wall the moment Jordan walked back to the gate. What Jordan did not know was that this man had watched Carl Higgins walk over to Jordan and had watched the badge change hands and had stood in the rain watching Jordan stand at the east gate for 40 minutes, finishing a shift he had just been fired from. What Jordan did not know was that this man had taken out his own phone at 11:02 and dialed a number. Kobe Bryant called his foundation director from the Staples Center parking lot in the rain at 11:02 on a Tuesday night. In February, he said, "I need to find a parking lot attendant at the Staples Center East Gate. I don't have his name, but he just gave a stranger $12 in the rain and got fired for it. And I want to know everything about him. By morning," his director said. "I'll start now." She had a name by 1 in the morning. Jordan Ellis, 19 years old. 2 jobs, community college, enrollment, active parking lot. Attendant terminated that evening. $412 in his bank account. Tuition payment. Due in 3 weeks. $5 weekly savings fund. Current balance. $40. Kobe read the file at 6:15. He called his director at 6:30 and said, "What does he need to get through the semester?" And she said, "Probably around $800 for tuition, and another couple hundred to cover the income gap from the job." And Kobe said, "Do it." And she said, "How do you want to structure it?" And Kobe said, "Find something he'd believe." And she said, "There's a workforce development grant for community college students in the service industry sector. It's real, and he'd qualify." And Kobe said, "Use that." The grant notification arrived in Jordan's student portal on Thursday morning. He read it twice. He called the financial aid office, and the woman confirmed the grant was real and had been applied to his account, and that his tuition balance was $0, and that there was a remaining amount of $312 that would be disbursed to him directly as a stipend. Jordan said, "I didn't apply for this," the woman said. "Students are nominated by partner organizations. Sometimes it comes through without an application." Jordan sat in the community college library for a long time after that call. He thought about $5.43 and a bus window and a bank balance. And he thought about the man against the wall in the rain and the way he had looked at the $12 and then at Jordan before he took it. And Jordan thought there was something in that look he had not been able to place at the time, and he sat with that thought for a while. He did not figure it out that day. He figured it out 6 months later when he saw a photograph on a sports news website, a Kobe Bryant Foundation event, and in the background, barely visible, was a face he recognized as the face of the man who had been sitting against the exterior wall of the Staples Center on a Tuesday night in February. In the rain, Jordan sat with that for a long time. He was 20 now. He had finished the semester. He had a new job at a logistics company that paid better and had better hours. He had $380 in the Get Out of This Situation fund, which was growing faster now. He was registered for next semester. He did not try to contact anyone connected to the foundation. He thought about it and decided against it. Not because he was not grateful, but because it seemed like the right thing to do was to become the kind of person the money had been intended for, and let that be the thank you. He did tell his mother. He told her on a Sunday evening, and she listened to the whole thing, and when he was done, she was quiet for a moment. And then she said, "You gave a stranger your last $12, and Jordan said, 'Not my last. I had $5.43. And she said, "Jordan," and he said, "I know, Mom." And she said, "You're going to be fine." And he said, "I think so." And she said, "I know so." Kobe never found out that Jordan had recognized the photograph. His director never found out. The grant file noted a successful disbursement and a continued enrollment. And that was the end of what any one official knew. Somewhere in Los Angeles, a 19-year-old who was now 20 was becoming the kind of person the $12 had said he already was. And that was the complete story, even if only one person in it knew all of it. Carl Higgins submitted Jordan's termination paperwork on Wednesday morning. He had been managing the Staples Center lot for 8 years and had fired 11 people in that time, and each termination had followed the same logic, which was that rules existed for operational reasons and that exceptions created precedents, and that precedents eroded systems, and Carl believed in systems the way some people believe in other things, which was completely and without questioning the foundation. The Staples Center contracted with a third-party company for lot management, and that company had a regional manager named Sandra Park, who reviewed termination paperwork for any attendant with fewer than 30 days on the job. As a standard quality control measure, Sandra read Jordan's termination file on Wednesday afternoon and noted the reason, which was documented as unauthorized interaction with non-patron on company property during active shift. And Sandra had seen this category of termination before, and it usually involved something that made sense, and occasionally it did not. She called Carl on Thursday. She asked him to walk her through the incident, and Carl described it accurately. Jordan had given money to someone outside the lot, and Carl had terminated him for violating the attendant interaction policy. And Sandra said, "What did Jordan give the person?" And Carl said, "Money." And Sandra said, "How much?" And Carl said, "I didn't count it." And Sandra said, "Was the recipient a patron of the lot?" And Carl said, "No, he was sitting against the exterior wall." And Sandra said, "So not a safety situation." And Carl said, "It's about the policy." And Sandra said, "I understand that." Carl and she thanked him and ended the call. Sandra called the foundation number that was listed in the grant documentation that had come through for Jordan that morning, because Sandra Park had worked in workforce development adjacent industries long enough to know that targeted grants that arrived within 48 hours of a termination were not always coincidental, and she wanted to understand what she was looking at. Kobe's director took the call. The conversation lasted 22 minutes. Sandra said she was looking at a termination that did not appear to meet the threshold. The company's own guidelines required for dismissal within the probationary period, and she said she thought Jordan Ellis should be offered reinstatement, and Kobe's director said that was Sandra's decision to make, and Sandra said she was going to make it, and she was also going to recommend a policy review for the interaction guidelines because the current language was broader than it needed to be, and Kobe's director said that sounded right. And Sandra said, "One more thing," and Kobe's director said yes. And Sandra said, "Whoever is watching your client should know." He turned down the reinstatement when it was offered, and Kobe's director said, "I'll pass that along." And Sandra said, "Good kid." And Kobe's director said, "Yes, he is." Jordan received the reinstatement offer by phone on Friday morning. He thanked the woman and said he had found something else. And the woman said, "The offer stands, if he changes his mind." And Jordan said, "I appreciate that." And he meant it. He started at the logistics company the following Monday. The Get Out of This Situation Fund hit $500 in April. He registered for next semester in May. In June, he moved into an apartment with 2 roommates that cost him less per month than the shared room he had been in, and he stood in the empty room that was going to be his on the first day with his single bag and his community college enrollment confirmation on his phone, and he thought about a bus window and $5.43, and he thought about what his mother had said, which was, "I know so," and he thought she was right, and that was enough. The logistics company where Jordan started in June was called Pacific Freight Solutions, and it was a mid-size operation that moved goods between the Port of Long Beach and distribution centers across the greater Los Angeles area. Jordan started in data entry, which was the entry point for most people without industry experience. And he was good at it, in the specific way that people who have spent 19 years paying careful attention to how things work are good at things, which is quickly and without needing to be shown twice. His supervisor, a woman named Diane who had been with the company for 7 years, told her manager after Jordan's 3rd week that he was the strongest new hire she had seen in 2 years. And her manager noted this and filed it in Jordan's personnel record, which was how things like that were supposed to work, and occasionally did. The Get Out of This Situation Fund became something different in September. Jordan, if this story moved, you drop your city and country in the comments below. And if you believe the kids who give their last dollar deserve to have someone give something back, please hit that like button and subscribe. Click the video on your screen right now for another story that will stay with you.